What are we going to do today?
Same thing we do every day, Dennis. And that is rail on Star Wars. Oh, no, seriously. Have you seen the movie The Last Jedi?
I did not want to subject myself to a machine like Disney just churning out movies to make oodles of money.
So, wait, are you a fan of the original Star Wars?
I am. I will only watch episodes 4, 5, and 6.
Okay, so you are a fan of the original.
Yes.
So for you, it's more of it's a ideological thing because of Disney, or is it? Or do you feel like they've ruined it?
I think they've ruined it. I think the first 3 were made under the premise of just wanting to make a good movie. Like, I think Lucas had a vision for this thing he envisioned would be great. And the movie showed the storylines are excellent. I think the acting is high quality. I think that the reason why people wanted to watch episodes 1, 2, 3, 7, and like the extra storylines is because of 4, 5, and 6. They were so good and so interesting.
That's the anchor.
Yeah,
that's clearly the anchor. So, what do you know about The Last Jedi, the newest one? Do you know have you heard anything about it? Reviews?
I've listened to some reviews, so I could at least have a conversation with the many people who are Trekkies.
Yeah.
Well, not Star Warsies.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, Jack and I went to see it the other night.
I'm sorry. Did you pay money?
Well, he did. He bought my ticket.
He's a good man.
We went to IMAX, saw it on the big screen.
Yeah.
First time I've been to IMAX here.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Yeah. Really good. The sound will blow you out of your seat.
Oh, yeah.
All right, but here's the thing. The Last Jedi, I don't even know where to start. I walked out, and he and I kind of looked at each other, and he was like, I don't know, man. The first third, he was checked out. And for me, it was pretty much the whole thing. There was something that was leaving me with just a bad taste in my mouth. You know how sometimes, though, you eat something initially nasty, and you're like, this just isn't very good.
Yeah.
And then the juices marinate in your mouth, and then it's like full-on turd.
Oh, my goodness.
The more I thought about The Last Jedi, the more angry I've become.
Oh, wow.
Angry. Okay. One, it's just a bad movie.
Oh.
There's the plot is terrible. There's really, really weird things. I don't want to spoil anything for people who haven't seen it, but there are some really bizarre use the Force moments.
Yeah.
That just will make, as a Star Wars fan, make you go bonkers.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. For some reason, they decided to shove feminism and animal rights down your throats.
Really?
Or down our throats.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even know where to start. I don't want to belabor this, but
is it blatant?
Oh, it is blatant.
Is it like Avatar blatant?
I think even more.
What?
Yeah, I mean, maybe not. I mean, the animal rights. No, everything's just right on the front. It was really bad. So much so, there's an article by I don't know if you've ever heard of this guy. His name's Non-Tenant.
No,
he's a Christian philosopher.
Okay.
And he's got a. I love this website. In the Habit of Goring is what it's called. I love that. And it has like antlers, wrapped around it.
Goring.
He has a post that I want to link to people to read this. It is a brilliant exposition of this.
Okay.
And he calls it The Last Jedi is the first successful leftist porno.
Ooh.
That's what he calls it. And he says, and here's his kind of opening thing. Why did the latest Star Wars installment receive fawning critical adoration but widespread contempt from average moviegoers? Because average moviegoers didn't realize that it was a film made to stimulate the engorgement of virtue rather than to tell a story. And his point is, and I think he's dead on. I was so frustrated with the plot lines of this movie because they were just stupid. There was things that just were hokey and stupid. But his point is, well, you got to understand you're watching a porno. A porno isn't about telling a story. It's about indulging some kind of gratification. He says, well, what is the gratification? Feminism. It's basically, we're going to have these women take on these roles and make men look foolish. And you don't really need a plot to do that. You just highlight that. You just put that on the screen and shove it down your throat. And you go, oh man. So I walked away. Even if you take all this aside, let's say they did the movie well and it had this feminist element and this animal rights element. Okay, fine. Whatever. That's
because there's a category for that. I mean, Wonder Woman is a movie, and
right.
I've watched.
That's an excellent movie.
Yeah, that's a very good movie, and the movie is essentially at bottom a feminist take on the world.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
so it's
and
interesting.
the difference between that and this is just feminist pornography.
Okay, all right.
That's all it is. And I can't.
Yeah.
I'm very, very disappointed.
I cannot sit through. I can't sit through bad movies. I rarely watch them now. So when I do watch them, it has to be for a purpose. And because of you, I've watched 2 movies recently. I take that back. I did watch a few Christmas classics. Yeah, you know,
with the kiddies, right?
Yeah, but I don't count that because I wasn't like engaged.
Right,
and wrapped up in
right.
it.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. I think that's awesome. Well, I have a question for you.
Okay, let's hear it.
Okay. So recently me and my wife was listening to a Christian radio channel. I mean, we keep it on for the kids. I'm not going to endorse the the one that we watch lest our listeners like, what? You actually listen to that channel? But long story short.
Now I'm totally curious.
I'm so not saying.
Okay.
Maybe off wax.
Okay,
I'll
all
tell
right.
you. So anyway, this beautiful story comes on about this guy who marries this young lady, and the young lady dies right after. And I'm like, oh man, that's horrible. But the more like the story went on, I find out that she had a terminal illness.
Okay.
And he knew this.
He was aware
and he
of
married
it.
her. He was aware of it. He
Before
knew
they
this,
got married.
And before they got married,
Right.
and he married her. And Austin, I don't know how I feel about it. So let me ask you this question. You've been married to your wife how long?
Oh man, you would ask that since '95. So what is that?
23
years.
20. Well, this would be 23 years. I think.
20, yeah, coming up.
Oh, okay. Before, let's just say you love your wife. You knew her. Obviously, you loved her enough to marry her. Let's just say
I know where you're going.
Going. I'm gonna make this super uncomfortable for you. I don't think she listened to this podcast. So answer truthfully.
Yeah.
You met her, you know her, you love her, you think she's the woman that you
So I
want to
met
spend the
her at
rest of us.
16.
Yeah.
And how long after do I find out?
Like you are at that point where you were when you're like, okay, I want to spend the rest of my life with this woman.
So let's say 17, just to round it up.
17. When did you all get married again?
I had just turned 19.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So it was right before you get married. You are popping the question to her, and she said, Austin, I got to tell you something. I just found out.
Now this is critical though. Is she when I pop the question telling me this, or do I know before I pop the question?
Let me take it a step back. Take a step back. Let's just say before you pop the question.
Before I pop the question,
you find out that she has a terminal illness, and then she tells you, Austin, I really want to get married before I die.
What's the time frame on this?
The time frame is the time before you ask her.
Well, I mean, I'm sorry, until she dies.
Let's say within 6 months, because that's typically
so fast.
Yeah, it's fast. It's not like she's gonna last for 2-3 years,
man.
Or she has some disease and you don't know which way it's gonna go. Like you know that right after you two get married, she's gonna die. Would you marry your wife?
Oh man. And I have to answer yes or no right now, or this just
yes or no.
Oh man! But we get to come back and explain, like usual.
I don't want to come back and explain.
Oh no! I gotta be able to explain. I can't do it.
I don't want you to come back and explain. I just want you to.
I just want
you to answer yes or no, and then we're just leave it and let our listeners think you're like the biggest jerk in the world.
Well. Okay,
we'll come back and explain that.
I mean, I'm gonna. Okay, because the difficulty with the yes or no questions is it forces you to go one way or the other. So where's the weight? Because everybody wants to say Ness, right? Ness.
Yeah.
Well, okay. I'm gonna say yes.
Okay.
That's where the weight. Since you personalized it, like when I imagine my wife.
Yeah.
And how I felt with her.
But I mean, you have 22 years of experience.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to confirm that decision,
Yeah.
I mean, so obviously my inclination now that I've been married about half of that is to, of course, say yes.
Right.
But that's my inclination.
In the abstract, I say no, though.
But for me, I would say no. But maybe we can come back and explain
Okay,
why.
all right, yeah.
We can come back and explain why.
Yeah.
Well, why don't you set up the clip that our listeners are going to listen to in the next few moments, and then we'll kind of dive into conversation. Or what did you want to do before?
Well, remember the bio. We got.
Oh, yeah, the bio. Go on our website and look at our bio. Austin came up with a great sort of way of letting you all know about us called Doctrinal Ingredients of Austin Brown and Dennis Lewis. So, all right, you go first.
Yeah, well, see, I was kind of curious. I thought it'd be fun.
Okay, yeah.
We got these jars full of our doctrinal ingredients. I thought it'd be fun just to each of us pick one. And why in the world did you pick that?
Okay.
So I want to know, based on yours,
Yeah.
what is partial hipster mean? What is a partial hipster?
So, okay, so, the full-on hipsters are the guys with the man bun, wearing the shoes without socks.
Yeah, I can't see you doing that.
Wearing tight-fitting clothes and, beer snobs.
Yep.
They love to eat their toast with, avocado on it. They eat ghee and all this. They work out. They work out to this finely crafted kind of deal. And hipster is also a mindset as well. It's you're environmental friendly and you tend to be a little leftist and
Right,
all that. Okay.
Right. So what?
So.
These seem the opposite of you, except for maybe the beer part.
Yeah, there are some things I'm actually hipster about, without consciously saying I'm being hipster about it.
All right.
Of course, I'm not gonna wear the man bun, and I'm
All
not
right.
gonna wear the tight-fitting clothes, and
Yeah.
I'm not gonna wear shoes with no socks and try to be trendy,
Right.
almost metrosexual
Yeah,
in
right.
a way. I'm not
Right.
gonna do that, but I have. Maybe it's a product of my age, but I have become super sensitive about what I eat. I have become super sensitive about what I drink. I do tend to look for more natural remedies, for my medication. I do try to think through natural ways of doing things as opposed to always running and getting.
So you're like a druid.
I don't know. I mean, I sometimes people tell me I fall into that hipster kind of I like weird music.
Okay.
I like indie,
The alternative indie music.
indie and stuff like that.
Really? Okay. I
hipsters,
didn't know that about you.
Yeah, I'm very much I would much prefer to live off the grid than on the grid. That's why I don't have a social
Really?
media presence. Yeah, I have a very limited, I should say, social media presence.
Interesting.
Yeah. So okay, my turn.
Yeah.
You. Unless you wanna.
No, go
Kinda
ahead.
ask
No,
me.
no,
Okay.
that's good. You covered all the bases. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna dispute it. That's well said.
Okay. All right. So here's one that when I just read it of you, I just died laughing. Non-home birthing.
Oh man, you are gonna push this button.
Yeah.
My wife is gonna be like, "No, Dennis, you just asked him that question."
Because I just looked at it, I was like, for someone to put that as a part of their doctrinal ingredient.
Well, here's the thing: have you met people? I gotta be careful here because I'm gonna get in trouble. But I don't care. See, this is the difference. I don't care. Have you met people who are all about home birthing?
Yes.
What do you think about that? In a sentence or two.
Okay.
Good or bad?
Okay. I know some people, so there's a spectrum.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So on the home birthing spectrum, I know people who are kooky.
Yes.
So they're if the spectrum is one being normal, I want a doula there, but I just want to do it at home versus, and I want to cut down on costs versus I want to be off the grid.
Right.
So I have a friend who wanted to be off the grid. He
Okay.
was in Alabama, but then his wife started having contractions and he found out that he couldn't, there was some law that they passed. So he drove his wife, who was crowning, to a Georgia hotel, called a doula.
What?
Yeah.
Okay.
So they don't have to register their child's
man.
a birth certificate. I'm like, dude, Like, do you realize that there are people right now, Americans, who cannot get documentation,
Right.
like passports and stuff, because their birth is not read. They don't have a social security number because their parents did this.
So there's
kind
like
of nonsense.
ideological reasons. There's much larger reasons.
Yeah, I mean, this guy lived off the map. He didn't want people to know where he was. I mean, thankfully, I kind of was able to keep up with him. Then I know people who are just like for them, they don't want to go into the hospital because it has germs and they have safer births anyway. Like, they don't have complications. There are some people that just slide out.
They know complications are coming.
Well, they don't know that, but I mean, I know a lady who, I mean, it's just like that. And she's like, why?
Well, that's
why am
all
I gonna
great.
go to hospital?
Okay, so yeah, why am I non-home birth? Yes, because I know those people too. But here,
I can't believe we're talking about this, but it's so awesome.
Well, I don't understand. I mean, one of the main reasons cited is I like to be in my own home where it's comfortable.
Yes.
You know, I'm not in this sterile environment that, you know, yada yada yada. But here's the thing. There are so many things that can go wrong.
Right.
With a birth.
Yeah.
So are you willing to jeopardize the life of your child for comfort?
Yeah.
That's basically what it comes down to in my mind. On my right hand, ooh, I got some comfort. Yeah, I like my own bed.
Yeah.
It's great. You know? But on my left hand, I've got, ooh, a cord's wrapped around my daughter's neck.
Oh my goodness.
And the midwife may or may not be able to save the child. Well, I say this because there are people in my family who have done this, and the kid died.
No way.
Yeah. Okay? Not cool. A midwife can't do it. Felicity, my daughter, had the cord wrapped around her neck.
Wow.
The doctor was very good at what he was doing. He was able to get her out, and they had respiration... I can't remember what they're called, but respiration experts or whatever on hand. 2 people put her over in this thing, and were ready to be able to give her oxygen and help her breathe. That's because there's a hospital.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know what would have happened otherwise.
Yeah.
I mean, she may not be with us today. And I go, comfort versus hello.
Well, let's take a step back, Austin. Okay. Let's realize for a second that prior to the 20th century, over 90-something% of births happened at home.
Yep. And how many of those died?
And I agree with you.
How many of those died?
But mortality rates, I would say mortality rates are better in the hospital, but kids still die in the hospital.
Oh, sure.
I mean, that just happens.
Sure.
I think for me, the question is, okay, I agree with you. The safety of a healthy baby goes down. The safety of a baby goes down with home births.
Yeah, or mortality rates are higher.
Yeah, mortality rates are higher with home births. I agree. I agree that might be the case. But I will also agree that the people who would want to have home births are people that, A, don't have a medical, an inherent medical issue with having children. Of course, every time you have children, a woman's on death's door. But there are some people, they just have easy births.
Yeah, but neither did my wife by our third one. Everything should have, this should be fine. And it was pretty quick, except the cord was wrapped around her neck. And as she was being pushed around, it's tightening.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's wrapped around her neck.
Yeah.
So you go, well, I hope the midwife can know what she's doing. And I hope if the baby isn't breathing that she has the proper equipment to be able to. I just don't get it, this mentality, because I've heard people who are pro, this and that, talking about doctors want to do all these medication stuff. Okay, are hospitals perfect? No. Are doctors perfect? No. Are these things advancements for good? Yes.
I mean, they are, but I mean, okay.
Are you a home birther over? Come on, man.
I am sympathetic towards home births. Yeah. And here's the deal, though. What surprised me is that you're a non-home birther, but you're pro homeschool. Yeah. And the same argument.
Because it doesn't kill my kids.
Well, some people would argue that it kills your kids intellectually, or that mindset.
But I'm in control of that.
Okay.
I'm in control. I'm not in control of the umbilical cord.
That is true, but some people lump the. You do know that people kind of lump those together.
People are stupid.
Yeah, people kind of lump together. And people say, okay, it's a non sequitur that you would be a non-birther but pro homeschool. Like, if you are going to trust the wisdom and the skill of doctors, why can't you trust the wisdom and the skills of professional teachers?
Right. Well, I could.
Yeah.
I could.
Yeah.
But my wife enjoys it.
Okay.
My wife, I mean, to me, it's an apples and oranges kind of thing.
I am inclined to agree with you. I do agree that obviously the risk of having a baby at home is higher. But I mean, I don't know. For my crazy friend who wanted to have his baby off the grid, I said, buddy, that's extreme.
Yeah.
But to the other friend who had numerous safe, healthy home births, I'm like, okay.
I mean, I'm not saying it's immoral. I'm not saying you are, by doing that, you're... No, I kind of am.
Yeah.
I think it's foolish.
Is foolishness immoral, though?
Right. I mean, maybe not.
Maybe not.
But maybe not. It could be almost a degree of neglect in a sense. But yes, to that point, no, I'm not going to call it sin.
Okay.
Obviously, I can't call it sin.
Yeah.
But when you could avail yourself of... let's say you have to have suddenly an emergency C-section.
Yeah.
I'd rather be at the place where they do it than to have to try to get my screaming wife into a car and drive 15 minutes and maybe have a flat tire on the way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't understand when you put them in their hands and you balance it one way or the other. Why you would, at the end of the day, and this is me being pejorative, I just want to have the comfort of my own bed.
I think if that's the only reason, I don't know. I mean, obviously, I'll say this one last thing, and I'd love your opinion on this.
Okay.
So, okay, let's just say for a moment, all things being equal, this brings us to the conversation of there's a lot of things that we think are unwise but not sinful.
Sure, right.
And as Christians, I think the world looks at us, and when we say that that somebody shouldn't do something, we're saying that it's sinful. Okay?
Right.
So I just want to make clear to everybody. I might think, or we might think, that home births aren't, they're not the brightest thing, especially when you have other options. You may want to avail yourself of those options. It's safer for you, safer for your baby. Mm-hmm. But of course, I'm not saying it's sinful. And I would say that I would caution... My wife was like, no, we're not having our babies at home. She was very clear because we had some people that were talking to us about it.
Good woman.
Yeah, she was like, no. And I find it weird. But hey, Jim Gaffigan, I remember he mentions that his wife has his babies at home.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
But it was just, I don't know, it's just weird. But anyway, I don't know why that popped into my mouth. But so you think that's fair to say that it's maybe not wise, but it's not sinful?
Yeah, riding a motorcycle is not sinful.
No.
However, I can't think of one person, literally in my entire existence, I can't think of one person who's ridden a motorcycle for very long who hasn't been in a wreck. Can you think of any?
No.
So in other words, in my mind, riding a motorcycle equals getting hurt.
Oh, wow. That's like saying riding a car. I mean,
but I'm saying motorcycle, the risk goes way up. But I'm just saying to your analogy, is it sinful to ride a motorcycle? No. Is it wise to always ride a motorcycle? No. I mean, if you don't want a broken leg or broken back or skinned face or, whatever, because people just don't see motorcycles.
Yeah,
they pull out right in front of you and all that kind of stuff. So, yes, to your point, yes, home birthing is not, obviously it's not sinful. I just say, we have state-of-the-art technology. We're going to take a baby out of a woman's stomach, if need to be.
Yeah.
And she didn't have to feel pain.
Yeah. You
can give her an anesthetic. This is amazing. This is great.
Yeah.
This is fantastic. There was a day when you had to drink a lot of stuff to have your tooth pulled. I'm really thankful I can go to the dentist. They can put a little needle in there and I don't feel a thing. That's great. That's fantastic. Why would I want to go back to the dark ages?
But does it? Okay. I mean, we have to get to our topic of the day, but you said something that kind of drove me. Like, okay, I have a problem with the fact that we are so desirous to mitigate the effects of the fall. Like, the Bible says
Wait, say that again? You think
I have an issue over the fact that man is always, and even Christians willingly say to themselves, I want to mitigate the impact of the fall
Oh yeah.
through non-spiritual means. So in other words, like
yeah.
like God says, hey, Eve, it wasn't that you weren't going to feel any discomfort, but I'm going to multiply that discomfort. Like, so I believe that Eve felt she definitely, I think,
Sure.
had sin not happened, she would have felt something moving, and it would have been mildly uncomfortable for her.
Sure.
I mean, you would have to think the loss of range of motion for having a baby in your stomach is problematic, even in a sinless world.
Wait, so let me. Okay, man, we may disagree profoundly here.
Okay, so let me just say this. Because of that, I think we rush to mitigate the impacts of the fall through non-spiritual means. So we just like pop pills and...
Right, so let me ask you, epidural, moral or immoral?
I would say it depends.
Oh my word!
I would say it depends. Okay, again, what did women all through the ages do before epidurals?
Die.
No, they didn't all die. That's not fair. We wouldn't have a population if they all died. A vast majority
But
of
it does
them...
add increased stress on the body. Because my wife did one naturally, and then she did two with epidural. It was night and day. I mean, night and day.
Listen, I agree with you, and maybe
First one
this...
about killed her. She
I-
lost a lot of blood and stuff.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Listen, I don't want to come across as somebody who's... I mean, my wife... I'll never forget when contractions hit my wife, because we had originally said, hey, we're going to go all natural. And the doctor kind of gave her this medication to kind of help with the contractions, like just to contract a little bit. And listen, those first 20, 30 minutes of contractions were so bad, my wife was literally shaking.
Oh, yeah.
She was just shaking.
I mean, it's clearly horrible.
Yeah, it's horrible. It's awful. And so in that moment, I was praying with her, and it's like, honey, breathe. And she's like, Dennis, I need the epidural.
Yeah, well, yeah,
Yeah.
right. Most get to that point about 3 centimeters.
Yeah.
Doctor.
Like, that's what I need this epidural. And I was like, honey, are you sure? And she's like, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I need
Like
this
right now.
Right now. And yeah, she was in less comfort. And I thought about that. Okay.
Like, was that sinful for her to want to mitigate the pain? Come on, man.
Come on, man. Austin, I haven't thought through this because, okay, would you agree that the prescribed way in which God deals with the impact of the fall is through Christ? Is that too much to say as a Christian?
Oh, right. Sure.
Yeah, like that's God's prescribed way. Would you agree that since then, man has been on a mission to mitigate the impact of the fall outside of the reality of Christ and God and His way?
Yeah, sure. But I don't know that there's consistent. You're going to have to say, well, you know what? We're not going to do vaccinations. We're not going to do heart transplants. The whole medical enterprise is going to fall apart unless you have some kind of weird pastoral doctor thing where they...
Well, obviously I'm not saying no medications. I mean, Paul told Timothy, take a little wine for the stomach's sake, right? God made provisions for, throw the bush in the water and make the water sweet, and, to prevent, a lot of stuff is preventative. A lot of medications when they're given in the Bible are preventative. Some are just straight healings. So I'm not saying that God isn't interested in mitigating the impact of the fall. I guess more specifically, I'm saying, why is it that we rush to do it without thinking through, well, okay, what is God trying to teach me through maybe this pain or maybe this discomfort?
Well, sure, right. In other words, I can be sympathetic to these kind of points. For example, take someone who's taking a bunch of antidepressants, for example. You'd be, hey, let's talk about maybe some of the underlying issues, right? Maybe sin issues, guilt issues, purpose of life issues. Fair enough. And maybe we should table this for another day, but I just have to say at this point, I think you're kind of crazy. Because if I got a headache, yeah, I'm popping a couple ibuprofen. And I thank God, seriously, for the ibuprofen. Yeah. It's amazing.
I can't take ibuprofen; it tears my stomach up.
Oh, really?
But yeah, of course I take Tylenol. But I do think every time I take something to mitigate the impact of the fall, I seriously think about, okay, Lord, I'm gonna do this, but this is more instinctual than me thinking through the spiritual ramifications of what I'm doing.
Well, I mean, okay. So, pain and suffering as a result of the fall are meant to tell us about the heinousness of sin.
Yeah.
Right? When a tsunami or a hurricane or something devastates a city, and a person is sitting on the rubble of their home, crying, in one real sense you should say, oh, my sin, my sin. Right? Yeah. Because that's the ultimate cause of why everything is in so much turmoil. Right. All creation is groaning, as in the
absolutely,
the pains of childbirth. But it doesn't mean that I don't want to build a home that won't be wrecked by the hurricane.
No, and you're right. You're right. That's not what it means. And I guess in that moment, I guess ultimately what I'm trying to call for is to say, let's think through a little bit more why these things are happening.
Yeah, fair. That's absolutely true.
Because I don't think we do. All right. Yeah. So what do we do now?
Yeah, we need to take a break. We'll come back and talk about Mr. Harris and the Very Bad Wizards.
Okay, let's do it.
Yeah. So I asked you, Dennis, to listen to an episode from Sam Harris's podcast, Waking Up, where he talked to the Very Bad Wizards. Yep. Now they were talking about persuasion and all these other issues, but at like the 1 hour and I think it's about 19-minute mark, Tamler asks Sam Harris a question about abortion.
Yeah.
And it's about a 7-minute long clip. Mm-hmm. Or so, whatever, 8 minutes, whatever it is.
Yeah, it's a little bit longer, but yeah.
So, I asked you to listen to it, and you did listen to it. You said you'd listened to it multiple times.
I had to listen to it. This is no exaggeration. The reason why I knew I listened to it at least 6-7 times.
That's a lot of time.
Yeah, it was because I was doing some work. Yeah. Like I was doing work to where I could listen to it and do the work.
You just loop it, right?
Yeah.
Because it is hard. It is hard to get.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, do you think it's interesting?
I think it's interesting to see how someone who doesn't start with their moral framework, the Bible as their moral framework, try to explain something that at the end of the day he even straight out admits this is purely arbitrary.
Well, and I thought it was interesting because I thought he introduced a principle and then pretty much turned right around and provided a way to deny the principle. And when Tamler asked him, tell me something that you're morally certain about. Is abortion something you're morally certain about? He's like, well, there's a spectrum here, but yes, I can come up with scenarios where we'd be absolutely morally certain. But in the space of about 7 minutes, it seems like he was morally uncertain.
Yeah. Well, don't take our word for it.
Yeah. We need to listen. So what we'll do is we'll take a break here. We'll insert it, and you guys can listen. I hope this is okay to do this, but if not, forgive us, please. Yeah. We're going to insert this little clip here, and then we're going to come back and talk.
All right.
So, Sam, you said earlier that you feel like sometimes that you're certain about a moral truth. So that was interesting to me, that you could be certain about some moral truth or moral fact, and your goal now is to convince other people to agree with you on that. How big is that category? Would something like abortion, the stance to be pro-choice or pro-life, is that one that you would that would be in the category or in the set of things that you think you're certain about?
At the extreme ends of the continuum, yes. But I would admit that drawing the line in gestation is difficult and is bound to seem arbitrary until all the facts are in. And maybe even when all the facts are in, it'll seem arbitrary. It's sort of like when you give someone a driver's license, what's the right age? But yeah, if you're going to say, is it okay to allow a woman to have an abortion when the fetus is, or the embryo is 2 days old? Or is that the murder of a precious soul that has to be protected the way a fully developed human being would? That strikes me as absolutely clear cut. Now, whether you're talking about when you get me into the second trimester, well, then all of my concern about harming a sentient being kicks in. That's a local case. But the more general case is, I think that if what you are concerned about morally doesn't have to do with the actual or potential well-being of conscious creatures somewhere, sometime, if it's something else, right, that doesn't map on to the experience of beings that can suffer, well, then it's a pseudo-moral concern. I mean, then you're making a category error, or, you care about something that you shouldn't care about.
But a 2-month embryo or even a 1-month embryo has a potential for well-being.
Yeah. So in the case of a 2-day-old embryo, right, I'm making it super clear. I think the interests of the mother and the kind of life she wants to live, her actual life, and the kind of life she thinks she can provide for this child that she doesn't want, if forced to have it. I mean, you can stack the deck. I mean, you can make the case for abortion as clear or as muddy as you want. And I agree that on both extremes, it can be very, very clear or very, very muddy. But if you give me someone we find out she's pregnant very early, and she really doesn't want the baby, I mean, it'll make it more extreme. She was raped, by her stepfather, right? Forcing her to bring this baby to term, I think that's, clearly wrong given the amount of misery you're imposing on this actual woman. But I think, to connect this to another question, existential risk, I think, is a real ethical topic worth talking about. And there you are talking about the interests of uncreated people, right? It's like why would it be a bad thing if the lights went out on our species, painlessly all at once tonight, and there were no more people? What's the loss? None of us would suffer. None of us would know about it. We would just cancel human history or end it abruptly. Why is that bad? Well, the only answer there is that it's bad because all of these good things, all of these creative things, all of these beautiful things won't happen in that case. But that is a loss to no one who exists anymore.
That's interesting, because one of the reasons I asked that question, I was listening back to an old podcast that Dave and I did on moral persuasion, and we read this article, and it was an article called, very famous in philosophy, Why Abortion is Immoral, by Don Marquis. And it was an argument for the pro-life position based on this idea of potential, that you are robbing a living creature of a future. And given that seems to be why we think killing is wrong in general, there's no reason for us not to think that it's wrong in this case. And it's a really just simple, elegant, and fairly effective argument, in that it's very hard to pin down where it goes wrong, if it does go wrong. But Dave and I both, we're both pretty solidly pro-choice, and as much as we recognize that this was actually a fairly compelling argument against our position, we both had to kind of admit that it didn't change our minds in any way about.
Let me give you a test case. So I haven't read that paper, but I think I got it based on what you just said. And it does change my mind, or at least I recognize that it could totally change my mind given the right technological environment. So for instance, if you made it very easy to remove this embryo, like painless, no risk to the mother to remove this embryo and grow it up in a vat or in the womb of a surrogate or another woman who wanted it, then the woman's claim upon having an abortion, I think, evaporates pretty quickly. So if you have a pregnant woman who doesn't want this baby, but someone else does, and this baby presumably
you could like transport it out with a transporter, right?
Yeah, we could transport it out or make it just very easy to remove, and then the argument that this is a viable life that is kind of interesting to the universe and has a claim upon itself, then I think that suddenly becomes hard to dispute. And then the pregnant woman's concern about, well, listen, I don't want to live in a world where I know I have this baby and now this son or daughter who I never wanted and who I'm now never going to meet. I just don't like the idea of it. Well, given the right changes in the environment and in culture, I feel like, well, that's defeasible. Then I think she might be in a position of someone who we would say, well, just get over it. This is not, doesn't really matter what you think. This is a person who exists now and has his or her own interests.
So is that so different in kind from her bringing the baby to term and immediately giving it up for adoption?
No, it is because, well, one, bringing a baby to term is its own sort of life deranging experience, right? And every birth, as you know now, is still something akin to a medical emergency. It's crazy no matter how many doctors you have on hand. And then you have her experience of having to go through the whole ordeal of bearing a child that she doesn't want and giving it up at that late stage, in the presence of the infant now. And like you're imposing, if she says she doesn't want this at 2 days conception, if the state is imposing this on her, I feel like it's so much of an imposition that she has to be free to decide whether she's going to shoulder this burden. Especially if you make it very clear, like, she was raped, or, just to take the other associations that could be negative with taking this to term, and then it becomes super clear to me. But you change enough, and then it changes.
Okay, so I'm curious.
Mm-hmm.
We've heard it afresh.
Yes.
What are your takeaways? I know you have a few things you've jotted down.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of curious, and then I'll bounce off that.
Sure, yeah. Okay, so takeaway number one. Of all, of course, to be fair, Tamler did say he did suggest that abortion, asked Harris. But I was amazed that Harris said, yes, I have complete moral clarity that on the abortion issue.
Yeah. He said, at the extreme ends of the continuum, yes. But I would admit that drawing a line in gestation is difficult and is bound to seem arbitrary until all the facts are in. And he says it's kind of like when you give someone a driver's license. What's the right age? But if you're going to say, is it okay to allow a woman to have an abortion when the fetus is, or the embryo is 2 days old, or that is the murder of a precious soul that has to be protected the way a fully developed human being would, that strikes me as absolutely clear-cut.
Now, here's what I found interesting. Yeah. Okay, most people of Harris's ilk, and I'm gonna lump him into the section where he is what we would consider a progressive.
Oh, sure.
The only thing that I know of that he breaks pretty cleanly with progressives is on the issue of Islam. And
he does. He
will
get them fired. Which, in all fairness, he's extremely sensible.
Yes,
he's just extremely sensible. But the left is a bit deranged.
Yeah, they're a bit deranged. Now, this is another issue I found out that he departs because most people that are progressives would say it doesn't matter if it's first, second, third. It doesn't even matter if the baby is halfway out.
Right.
At any point before the little toe or whatever comes out, if you want to drill a hole and snip that baby and kill that life, you can. Mm-hmm. Harris doesn't say that.
Mm-mm. He roots it in other principles, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And one of the, maybe we should.
Yeah, let's talk through some terms because he does seem to root it in the principle of consciousness.
Yeah. Well, and he has. Principle A would be, he says, now when you get me into the second trimester, he contrasts this with like a 2-day-old embryo and something in the second trimester. And your point is, I mean, what's really the difference? People who are really Planned Parenthood advocates are going to go, yeah, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. It's a woman's right, period. Full stop, done.
Yep.
But he will say, when you get to the second trimester, then all of my concern about, quote, harming a sentient being kicks in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now that's interesting. So part of his principle is, like, we can't harm a sentient being.
Right.
However, that seems to bump up against, because he'll go on to say, if it's something else that doesn't map onto the experience of beings that can suffer, well, then it's a pseudo-moral concern. So in his mind,
Right.
if a 2D embryo isn't sentient, it can't experience pain and suffering. It doesn't map on to the experience of suffering. Therefore, it's a go.
Yeah, which again, that's born out of the fact that Harris is a consequentialist, right? So, in the morality of the consequentialists, they believe that it's all about producing sort of the right kind of consequences. Like every action or means of everything that brings about a particular good. Like the action itself brings about a particular good. So obviously, if you are saying that something is a sentient being, they can feel pain, they can think, they have awareness, then to deprive them of that is to create a situation in which you are depriving them of the same ability that, say, an older person has, right? So that the act of depriving them of life does not produce the consequence of their life going on to be like doctors or lawyers or something along those lines.
A potential good.
A very good human being, yes.
Yeah. So on the one hand, okay, so we have... I'm just trying to understand his logic here, because on the one hand, I want to give him a pass because the question was thrown on him out of the blue.
He gets no pass.
Exactly, and the reason he gets no pass is because certainty. It means you better have thought through it.
And that's why I don't give him a pass. I wasn't saying that to be tongue in cheek.
Right.
If somebody says, Dennis, what are you morally certain about?
Right, yeah, presumably you've got this ironed out.
I will say I am morally certain that a God exists.
Okay.
And then they will say, okay, defend that.
Right, you have
there
to...
will be no equivocation.
Yeah, right. Right.
And
if you have some, as it were, some apparent inconsistencies, you should be called.
I think that's fair.
You should be called on it for sure. Okay, so on the one hand, he has this principle: can't harm a sentient being.
Yeah.
It's a pseudo moral concern if their experience doesn't map on to the reality of suffering.
Let's unpack that for a bit.
Okay.
I found it to be interesting. So essentially, what Harris is saying is that if you grant that a baby in the first trimester is not a sentient being, then the conversation is now moot, right? We don't have to worry about the ethical boundaries or the moral landscape of ending. I mean, at that point, I don't know if it's appropriate in his to attribute that he would call it a life, but not allowing whatever that is, if it's non-life, to continue, then all the ethical considerations that you'd apply to the second and third trimester, essentially, you wouldn't to something that you don't apply the same characteristics to.
Yeah, that's a fair path. I think the way he does is, and correct me if you think this is wrong, but he seems to have, as it were, almost, well, we have competing issues here. The one is, well, it's not a sentient being that can't feel anything, and when you take that and bump it up against the woman's desires, I think I can really take care of the baby the way I ought to. I don't want to go through 9 months of misery. I don't want to go through. We just talked about. I don't want to go to home and have home birthing. She doesn't want to do all that.
Back to home birthing.
Yeah, back to home birthing. She doesn't want to do all that. So therefore, that is perfectly justifiable, therefore, to end a non-sentient being's life. Because I think he would say it was life.
But here's my thing. That's a very good summation of what he's saying. The only thing I would say in response to that is, why do you need a reason to end a non-sentient being's life?
Yeah, and
why provide this narrative that if the woman doesn't want to, listen, I don't call up my doctor, or I don't call a lawyer when I want to clip my fingernails.
Right.
To say, the only reason why I'm clipping my fingernails is because I feel like if I keep my fingernails, I will harm somebody else, or I'll scratch myself on the face. Like, there's not a backstory for removing a wart. Right. There's not a
that collection of cells. Is insignificant.
That's insignificant. So I don't need a backstory. So the very argument that he's giving suggests that the thing to which he's arguing is not what it appears to be. Because if you're going to tell me that we should consider the existential crisis of a woman to remove non-sentient cells, then why are we even having that? Why is the argument that the woman has an existential crisis? What bearing does that have on removing non-sentient cells? If at root you believe that you need an argument to remove these non-sentient cells.
Now, it's interesting because Tamler, hats off to Tamler, he brings up this question, yes. Harris responds, and he says, but a 2-month embryo or even a 1-month embryo has a potential for well-being. So he raises this thing. And that's where Harris kind of he says, yeah, but in the case of the 2-day embryo, right, I'll make it super clear. I think the interests of the mother and the kind of life she wants to live, or her actual life, and the kind of life she thinks she can provide for this child that she doesn't want. If forced to have it, I mean, you can stack the deck. You can make the case for abortion as clear, as muddy as you want. And I agree that on both extremes it can be very, very clear or very, very muddy. But if you give me someone who we find out she was pregnant very early on and she really doesn't want the baby, he makes it more extreme, talking about stepfather raping her and whatever, then, you're imposing this misery on the woman. But then he goes on and he makes this comment that Tamler's going to jump on again. He says, but I think to connect this to another question, existential risk is a real ethical topic worth talking about. And here he talks about a thought experiment where, what if you had the world, everybody in the world, in their sleep, suddenly die. Yeah. And they're gone. No pain, no anything. At that point, he goes, what would be the bad in that? The only bad he at least he attributes to here is he says, why is that bad? Well, the only answer there is that it's bad because of all the good things, all these creative things, all these beautiful things that won't happen in that case. But that is a loss to no one who exists anymore.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty revealing.
So Tamler, of course, jumps on this. He's like, no, whoa. So basically, the bad of having everybody just disappear like a 2-day embryo is that, well, you're missing out on potential goods.
Right.
And he's like, so, how is that different? And then he cites this paper by Don Marquis, Why Abortion is Immoral. And you read that, right?
I read that. And, okay, so Tamler, you have the transcript, right?
I do have the transcript.
Okay, does Tamler say that Don Marquis makes the argument that the reason why we shouldn't kill an embryo or a month-old baby is because it's potential?
Yeah, sorry. He says, and based on this idea of potential, you're robbing a living creature of a future. And given why we seem to think that killing is wrong in general, there's no reason for us to think that it is wrong in this case. He says it's a really simple, elegant, and fairly effective argument.
Yeah. So, okay, the argument is actually a little bit more complex than that. I know he was doing shorthand. Yeah, so I'm just going to read the one. By the way, so I read the article, Don Marquis, and it's called Why Abortion is Immoral. I highly recommend that you read it.
Okay, I haven't read it. I want to read. I need to read that.
Yeah, you've read some of it.
I read that. I skimmed it, and then I read the conclusion.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. But if you want shorthand, read beginning argument 30 and on. But I just want to read paragraph 31.
Yeah, let me hear it.
And I love the way he does it. So this is his argument. He says, this argument, the argument that he's giving, does not rely on the invalid inference that since it is wrong to kill persons, it is wrong to kill potential persons also. So he's starting by saying, like, listen, those of us that argue and say, okay, since an embryo is not quite a person, but a potential person, and it will eventually get to a person, that if we argue like that, that's wrong, and that's not his argument. So then he goes on to say, the category that it is morally central to this analysis is the category of having a valuable future like ours. It is not the category of personhood, which I find in and of itself a fascinating argument. So he's saying that what robs, like, okay, if somebody kills somebody else, person A kills person B, what makes that wrong isn't that person A stopped the movement of a particular cell or just destroyed a particular type of cells in this person's body. That's not what makes the murder wrong. What makes the murder wrong is that this person had the right to a future in which this person could have done good and had a blessed state, could have health and enjoyment. That was robbed from that person. That's his argument. Then he goes on to say, the argument to the conclusion that abortion is prima facie seriously morally wrong proceeds independently of the notion of the person or potential person or any equivalent. So we say it doesn't even matter. Someone may wish to start with this analysis in terms of the value of the human nature, conclude that abortion is, except perhaps in rare circumstances, seriously morally wrong, infer that the fetus have the right to life, and then call fetus persons as a result of their having the right to life. Clearly, in this case, the category of person is being used to state the conclusion of the analysis rather than to generate the argument of the analysis. And I think that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Because he's saying, when you say that this human being, is the same as, a fully grown human being, you're assuming in the argument what you're trying to prove. It is much better to say that this person has a valuable future that you are robbing them of, in the same way that an adult has a valuable future, especially an adult that has children, that has a wife, that has a job, that's advancing in their career. If you rob them of all of that, right, that is what makes murder wrong in his estimation.
Sure, on his framework.
Exactly. So that's the central part of his argument.
Well, that's what's, and that's a pretty slick argument.
I was sitting down there like, you've got to be... The only thing, I am... Me and you are Christians, so obviously we're saying, that's not grounded in Scripture, in the person and work of Christ.
Right.
But I could definitely see where that is embedded into the whole concept that thou shalt not kill.
Sure.
Yeah. So,
you're stealing life.
Exactly.
It's not your life to take.
Exactly.
God's the only... He's the author of life, and he's the author of death. I thought it was interesting, before we get on to... We're just trying to map out right now the logic of Harris's rationale. But I did think it was interesting that Tamler, after bringing this up, he says, but Dave and I we're both pretty solidly pro-choice. And as much as we recognize that this was a fairly compelling argument against our position, we both had to kind of admit that it didn't change our minds in any way.
Oh, yeah.
That's really fascinating admission. I appreciate that kind of honesty. Like, in other words, I've met a persuasive argument.
Yeah.
But it really just, at the end of the day, didn't persuade me because of preferences.
Yeah. And then he talks about Jonathan Haidt. Do you have that? You should, about Haidt's theory. I love Jonathan Haidt, by the way.
I don't remember that.
If you've never read or seen anything from Jonathan Haidt, he's a university professor who tends to rail against college students for being, snowflakes, or just using the argument of intersectionality and privilege in order to avoid critical thinking.
Okay.
And he's written significantly on that, got a lot of flack for that. He teaches at the University of either New York.
I've heard the name. Yeah. I'm sad to say I'm not familiar with really his stuff.
Yeah. Right after he said that, he references Jonathan Haidt's research, which essentially is, we are very good at coming up with reasons for a thing after we have already reached the conclusion of a thing from our emotions.
Well, it's like a confirmation bias. It's like a cognitive dissonance.
Yeah. Now, that's one way of looking at it, but there's another way of looking at it. Now, of course, I'm Augustinian, so I'm going to borrow from Augustine a little bit. But I think Augustine had this in his writing, but it was brought into clearer focus under Anselm. Anselm had a saying, "Fides quorens intellectum."
Okay, what's that mean?
Faith seeking understanding. And so what Augustine said before him is that, listen, all of us start off with a belief, a faith in a particular thing. Now, in our time, we call it emotion. Like we feel a certain way. But they wouldn't call it that. They would say, no, that's a response to faith. Our emotions happen as a response to external stimuli. They would say that's faith, right? So we come to a faith position, and then we seek understanding. So we add understanding to that. So let's just say somebody says, I believe in God. And then somebody comes to them and says, well, how do you know God exists? Now, in that moment, they might not know or have arguments for that. But because they have this belief, they will go and seek the evidence.
Sure.
That nowadays we call it confirmation bias.
Yeah.
All right, fine, whatever.
Yeah.
But the point is that they were making to Harris is that they were unchanged by this very good argument, and the argument is fantastic.
Yeah.
And Harris probably would be unchanged as a result of that. Didn't you remember what he said after that?
What did he say?
Well, Harris kind of says, you know, I know Jonathan Haidt, and Jonathan Haidt is right about most people, but he's not right about me. And then Tabler says, yeah, Jonathan Haidt predicted you would say something like that. And it was so funny.
That's good. Yeah, I thought Tamler was really on point here.
Yeah, he was.
Okay, so, all right, so Tamler raises this paper by Don Marquis. I think that's how you say his name, Don Marquis. I can't remember how he said it anyway.
Probably some French dude.
Yeah, and so he's talking about you're robbing potential life. He's like, well, that's a really elegant, good argument, but for some reason it didn't really sway us. Harris says, well, this is where, okay, he has on the table, hurting sentient life is bad. But then he kind of turns around and says, well, I don't know what the bad would be of just making everybody disappear, except that you're removing, potential goods and stuff like that. So Tamara raises objection. He's also said on the table that, look, you can't make a woman endure the misery if she doesn't want to. Take out the non-sentient being, yada, yada. But now he says, if you make it very easy to remove an embryo, painless, no risk to the mother to remove this embryo and grow it up in a vat or in the womb of a surrogate or another woman who wanted it, then the woman's claim upon having an abortion, I think, evaporates pretty quickly. And Dave jumps in. You mean let's say you could have this situation where a woman is pregnant, 2-day embryo, and you could teleport it out. Just boom, it's out.
Yeah.
At that point, he says, yeah, we could transport it out and make it very easy to remove. Then the argument that this is a viable life that is kind of interesting to the universe, what the heck does that mean? And has a claim upon itself, then I think that suddenly becomes hard to dispute. Then he says, then the pregnant woman's concerned about, listen, I don't want to live in a world where I know I have this baby, and now this son or daughter who I never wanted, and now I'm going to have to meet him, yada, yada, yada. Well, given that the right changes in the environment and culture basically have occurred, then I feel like that's defeasible. Then I think she might be in a position as someone who would say, just get over it. Yeah. So what's the logic here? If you could teleport it out and create a painless situation where the life is viable on its own, then he can tell the woman, get over it.
Yeah.
Is this a contradiction, or am I missing something?
Okay.
I think it's a contradiction.
First of all, let me skip to the end and say something. Tamler kind of says, after they actually had this conversation, Tamler kind of makes the point and says, yeah, I don't really have a problem with contradiction in moral arguments because they exist. I think this is a contradiction, but what Harris cleverly says is, in his moral landscape, and this is a part of being a consequentialist, he can envision peaks and valleys of the moral landscape.
Right.
And so what Harris would say to get rid of for something to be contradictory, you have to give a premise, and then you have to give the opposite premise.
Sure.
And the opposite premise is in the same vein or the same situation as the original premise. That's what makes it contradictory. Mm-hmm. Like, a person can't be, here and at the same time outside.
Right.
Sure. Like that's
right.
a
You can't have A and not A.
Yes, exactly. In the same time, in the same space, in the same way.
Yeah.
That's what makes something contradictory. So what Harris would say is, no, I'm not being contradictory. What I'm envisioning is I'm envisioning a scenario in which I would say X.
Right.
And then I would envision another scenario. That
different environment, different circumstances.
Exactly. And that's what would take it out of the realm of contradiction. Because for something to be a contradiction, we have to be talking about it in the same way, in the same realm. So I think it's very clever.
Yeah.
I mean, he obviously knows his philosophy. He understands how logic works. And so for him to be logically consistent, he would say, okay, I can't say that it's this way in this situation, this way in another situation, without changing the situation completely. And that's where his moral landscapes come from.
Yeah.
So to be fair to Harris,
I
have to say that he's a clever man. He understands. He obviously understands the situation very well. And in order to be non-contradictory, he's envisioning two separate scenarios. At the peak, he would say that for the woman, it would be advantageous for this scenario to happen. Mm-hmm. But since the scenario can happen, right? So different scenario, the valley or the other peak would be that we defer to her and what she wants.
All right, so I'll push back, imagining you're defending the position. So the mitigating factor is not having the tools to teleport it out,
yes,
and to keep it alive.
Yes.
And the other mitigating factor is the misery of the woman. But so on the one hand, you're saying, well, it's not a sentient being. The pushback is, well, but there's potential well-being here. There's potential goods, and you say, well, yes, okay, but that is mitigated by the misery of the woman. But if you can get rid of the misery of the woman,
right,
then too bad. You got to live with it.
Right.
And I say, okay, so the non-sentient being part is irrelevant. It's not that you can't feel harm. It's not that it's non-sentient. You agree that, well, if it's a potential good, then there's something there. And if I could take it out, make it viable, and keep it alive without creating any angst for the mother, then yeah, that's a different set of circumstances. So okay, maybe not, I'd have to think about whether or not it's flat out contradiction, but it strikes me as at least so compromising to at least the initial conditions that made him say it was a moral certainty, then I go, it's not how can you say it's a moral certainty?
Well, here's the thing. When you think of moral certainty and when Harris think of moral certainty, you would agree that you're both thinking about two separate things.
Well, probably, more than likely.
When you think about a moral certainty, you're thinking about it in religious terms to say that we know that there is the highest standard of truth.
Right.
That's why Harris's moral landscape is so appealing to non-religious people. Because here's the deal. That peak of the moral landscape could be anything you want it to be. In Harris's mind, the peak of in this issue is, okay, in this scenario, the mother's threshold for pain or comfortableness is going to trump a child.
Yeah.
If you were to ask him, where is that peak? He would say, that's the peak. For us, we would say, no. Our standard ultimately is the Word of God.
The child didn't change in that peak. The child didn't change.
No, it did not.
But
that
for
doesn't
him, the
matter.
circumstances changed the nature of the child, as it were. Or at least the conditions that make it moral.
You've nailed it.
And I go, and that's the difference between our worldviews, because I look at the 2-day embryo and I go, there's a fact of the matter. It's a human embryo that is human life that is precious in the sight of God.
Yes.
Therefore, you don't kill it.
Yes.
Period.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you can teleport it out.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if the woman was, I mean, to put it harshly, if she was raped. You don't overcome evil with evil.
Yes.
You overcome evil with good.
Good, yeah. And see, that statement is the essence of the gospel. Overcoming evil with good. The way you deal with evil is not more evil, but in Harris's mind, again, we're not talking about an evil. We're talking about a landscape in which, and Harris kind of sets himself up as a moral arbiter. I mean, you can tell in his mind.
Oh, yeah.
He provides, he has the ability to establish, he considers himself in the same vein as Aristotle and Plato. Like, we are the moral arbiters of society because we're very gifted at understanding particular concepts and communicating them in a very good way. We're very gifted at that.
Right, he is gifted. He's a gifted communicator, gifted thinker.
Gifted thinker. And because of that, he feels a societal responsibility to lay out a moral framework apart from Christianity. He's very open about that. And in his moral framework, okay, we have a situation where we have two competing values.
Yep.
I can envision a moral landscape in which the one competing value has priority over the other, and I can envision, so let's say the woman in this case, and I can envision another moral landscape where we can give this potential being some rights, because obviously it would be completely arbitrary, which would be illogical for me to say that something that can feel pain like me and reason a bit like me should be deprived of life. So
I want to go to kind of the wrap up of this that I have here, but I am curious. I wonder what I'm curious what you would think he would say then. If the idea is not to hurt, if you can't map the experience on the suffering, it's not a sentient being.
Yeah.
I really do wonder what he would say about people in comas, people who, like, let's say you just took a 1-year-old,
right,
and you made it completely under with anesthesia.
Yeah.
Well, can you kill it?
No.
Well, I'm sure he has a response to that, but I can't, given these principles, I can't see exactly what it would be, other than, well, you were the one who put it under, and you have your intentions are malevolent. You go, well, okay, but isn't a mother with the 2D embryo that isn't sentient? I mean, isn't there a certain malevolency there?
On Harris's moral landscape, I'm almost positive he would say something like, listen, it depends on the facts. If this person is in a coma with no chance of ever regaining consciousness, like it is being kept alive by machines, then yes, if you stop the machine, the person doesn't possess the power to live under its own being. Now, if the machine is kind of helping the person along, and this person has a good chance of regaining sentient quality, then it would be impermissible to end that person's life.
Well, let's take capital punishment then. So you've got a lot of the people on the left are against capital punishment. Well, if you just make them go to sleep, so they can't feel anything, and then you turn off their brainwaves.
That's a good.
Right?
Yeah.
What's the difference?
But that's intentional.
And so is the mother.
Well, first of all, I'm not a Harris apologist.
I know.
I'm just kind of
get the logic.
Yeah. So Harris, in fact, it's interesting. Harris said in this particular podcast that when they gave him the Jonathan Haidt example, he said that he actually he gave an example of a time in which he did change his mind on an issue. And that is on the issue of the death penalty. Because he said that that's one instance in which he know within himself that he has the ability to consciously think through biases that he has and actually make a decision to change his decision. And so he didn't go into it, but Harris is now against the death penalty. But he didn't elaborate on the moral reasons. One would assume that the reason why he would be against the death penalty is because he thinks that it's unethical to end the life of a human being. Like, there's no... And I think to some degree that's more morally consistent. Because if he's saying that it's unethical to end the life... If he envisions scenarios in which the life of the mother takes priority, then whatever ethical norms he's applying to her life, he has to apply to the life of someone who has committed murder. And then obviously that ties into his whole sort of view of that we don't have a free will. So maybe that discussion of the compounding of us not having a free will, and then the compounding of us having more ethical considerations because we are sentient beings. To me, that seems logically consistent that he would say, I'm against the death penalty.
Yeah. Yeah, and obviously from where I sit, I would want to criticize the entire structure of his ethical system. Right. I mean, to me, it comes down to, look, we're all playing a game of preferences here. Absolutely. On your view. This is just a game of preferences. Can we all just own it up to it? Yeah. Right. Some people are just going to prefer one way and others are not. And in a godless world, it's not going to matter. But I still think on their own terms.
Right.
I thought this was a really good insight and a fascinating reveal, as it were, of the thought process.
Yes.
On something that was initially supposedly a moral certainty, in which just a couple pushbacks from Tamler is suddenly didn't seem like such a moral certainty.
Oh yeah.
In fact, it seemed pretty muddled in my mind. Now, I know he's going to want to say, I said it twice, that there are extremes where you can make it very, very muddy, very, very clear. And I'm going, well, but even on your clear example, it seems really muddy.
It seems pretty
muddy. If you
muddy.
can teleport the kid out.
Yeah. I do have a question for you as we're ending.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's a question that was kind of posed to... there's something that Harris said that I would be very much... I think we'd all benefit from you kind of commenting on this. So they kind of said to Harris, well, Harris, under your view, you seem to be putting the emphasis on the welfare of conscious beings, right? Mm-hmm. Which they would say, okay, that's dangerous. And obviously what they're saying is the danger is when we put the emphasis on conscious beings and anything that does not fall into the conscious being. So
a tree.
Not just a tree, but I'm thinking more, let's just say the peak of consciousness is a 45-year-old man.
Okay.
Right? Like, let's say that's the peak of consciousness.
Right. Fully cognitively functioning.
Yeah. That's when, in your 40s, you're typically at the height of your mental capacity.
Right. Let's just take that as a given.
Yeah, let's take that as a given.
With a sphere of range.
So, obviously, what Tamler and, I keep forgetting his name. Dave. Obviously, what they were saying is, okay, we could envision people that are still alive but not fall into that category. Mm-hmm. I mean, now we're getting into the realm of Nazism, right? That there's some people that we deem to be more human because they're more conscious, and therefore we can do whatever nasty, inappropriate, God-forsaken thing we want to the people that don't fall in that category. We could treat them as the refuge of the world, right?
Given the fact that they're deviating from the perfect standard.
Exactly.
Okay.
So Harris responds by saying, yes, we all do that. And then he goes on to say, even religious people, which you fall in that category, I do too, that even religious people fall into that category, that they preference those that go to heaven over people that go to hell, and that we preference people that are saved versus people that are non-saved. And when he said that, I'm like, my mouth dropped open. I said, for as brilliant as he would speak on issues, I was astounded that he could be so ignorant about the issue of the nature of what we believe. So how would you respond to him in that scenario?
Yeah, and maybe he has run across... I mean, there are certain strands in Christianity, like hyper-Calvinism, that does, in one sense, have a really strong bifurcation between the elect and the non-elect, where there's no common grace, there's really nothing there for the non-elect.
Yeah.
And in that sense, the objection would stick.
Yeah.
But in my view, we are all... I guess I would back up and say the 45-year-old man still isn't the greatest potential because he's not conformed fully to the image of Christ. So if we're going to take that line of thinking, we all fall short of the glory of God.
Yeah.
We all are in a real problem.
Yeah.
So as soon as you get on this continuum like this, I think you get in trouble. Yeah. The value isn't rooted in functionality.
Yeah.
The value has to be rooted in some kind of objective stamp. And obviously, it's going to be the Imago Dei.
Yeah.
A human being is ontologically different than or a non-human being. Right. It just is. So sentience is part of that. Feeling pain is part of that. But if you remove, as it were, the accidents, you still have the essence.
Yeah.
Right? Just because somebody's unconscious, they're still a human being.
Yeah.
And they're still precious in the sight of God.
Yeah.
Even if they're marred and torn by this sinful creation, being retarded, being in a coma, being whatever, right? Being a 2-day embryo. All of these factors, I would say, do not diminish the intrinsic value or worth of a human being. And the only way you can have that is to either create an arbitrary line in secularism. You just, by fiat, you just say, this is where it's at, we're going to do it this way.
Yeah.
Or you have a transcendent being who is the greatest good, who imparts that good on something else and says, this is it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I that's brilliant. Yeah. I mean, when I heard him, I said, okay, exactly what you said. Two things immediately popped into my mind. Number one, the only ideal man is Christ. Mm-hmm. So, your whole notion that we prefer conscious beings, the reality is we look at all men as the same. There's no ideal man. We're all, the Bible is pretty clear. We are all born in trespasses and sin. We are all in need of a Savior, and we all go to the cross the same way. Nobody has a leg up on anybody else. And at the same time, we realize that our need, right, the only way, what makes a believer and a non-believer, what makes a believer different from a non-believer is by virtue of his election, not by virtue of some intrinsic goodness. And I think Harris envisions that we believe that, and he might, depending on the sources that he read, like you said, he might read from sources who make it seem like in Christianity we believe that we have some intrinsic goodness. That's why God chooses us.
Right.
But
not the case.
Not the case. Classic Reformed Calvinistic doctrine teaches pretty clearly that we are not saved because of intrinsic goodness. We are saved because of the righteousness of Christ and the imputation of that righteousness on us.
Well, and even almost further, he chose Israel because they're so stiff-necked.
Yeah, he was. You're so sinful. I'm going to say.
Yeah, right. It like works the opposite direction.
Yeah.
What was your? Did you have another point? Sorry, I jumped in.
No. That's fine. And that's it. I mean, you said it very well. I think ultimately, I want to say this for our listeners as sort of like an encouragement to you. Listening to this clip reminded me that when I listen to people that don't have a Christian worldview, that don't think through the lens of Scripture, that's what we mean by Christian or biblical worldview. They don't think through the lens of Scripture. I'm reminded that we can use the same words, but we have vastly different definitions and implications and thought patterns regarding those same issues. And it was helpful for me to take a step back, and I really worked to understand Harris here. That's why I listened to it so much time, because at first I was very dismissive, very sort of like, that's nonsense. And then the more I listened to it, the more I said, you know what? I get it. Like I got it. Like I understand his use of the moral landscape now. I understand why he holds some of the views so much better. So if you do listen to the clip, listen to it more than once. Try to listen to it a few times and really work to understand, because I know it benefited me. Benefited me, truly did.
Yeah, and I echo everything you just said as well. Certainly more to say, but I think we do need to wrap up with the yes or no question that you asked. So I want to know why I can't remember how you answered. You said
I said no.
And you say why no?
Okay, so why no? First of all, the reason why I said no is because the premise of my argument is this. People that want to get married knowing that they are going to die at a set time, because obviously anytime we enter into marriage, our spouse could die at any time.
Sure.
Okay, but if you know you're going to die at a particular time, to me, that seems very, you're turning marriage into a sacrament at that point. Like marriage isn't being used the way God intended it. And I think this is very important for me in my theology of marriage. Marriage is a good, it's a part of the created order that God gave. In work, I have like my 3-prong: work, wedding, and worship. Those were the three a part of the creation mandate or the culture mandate, whatever you want to call it. And the wedding primarily is supposed to be a union of two people before God to produce offspring and to glorify God through that union. And I think that entering into that covenant, knowing that you are going to die for the sole purpose of just being married, I think it's impermissible. I think that violates the spirit of what the creation mandate entails.
But does that quote unquote violation? Let me push back just a little
Okay.
bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
In order to, but is it really a violation? I mean, what if? Isn't it enough to say, I have fallen in love with this person, and I want to take care of them and show sacrificial love? Wouldn't that be a wonderful picture?
But you don't have to do that and be married. I mean, could you
Well,
not?
that's true.
Yeah, could
That's
you
true.
not equally do that? I mean, let's just say I find out that you have cancer, and I'm I consider myself to be a good friend of yours. I pray for you. I support you whenever I can.
You wouldn't marry me, Dennis?
I would. It would be impermissible biblically.
That would be a violation.
I mean, we could certainly develop a friendship where, like David and Jonathan, were knit to each other.
Right.
But I would come over by your house. I would take care of you. I would make sure that you're comfortable, and if you need things, I would provide it for you. And I mean, I don't even have to do this in the abstract. I did this with my next door neighbor. I mean, I don't go around kind of talking about this, but my next door neighbor, who's dead now, had Alzheimer's. And his wife came to me and said, Dennis, I can't afford to bring in a caretaker. Could you please help me? And I went over every day for about a year, and I wiped him. I changed his diaper, wiped his poop, cleaned him up, fed him. Nitty gritty stuff. I would sit with him at times. I did that. I wasn't married to him. I didn't really even know him, but I was trying to be a blessing to my neighbor, and this is one way I could do it.
You're being a good neighbor in the truest sense of the word.
So I can envision a scenario where I don't have to be married to somebody in order to do everything that you just said.
That's a fair point. Yeah. I guess I'd have to think more. My immediate reaction is to go, I don't think it'd be violating. Like, it wouldn't be wrong. In other words, Paul can say to the Corinthians, "Oh, if you're burning with lust, for one another, go ahead, it's fine, get married."
Yeah,
you know what I mean. So let's say the guy and the girl, they're like, "Man, we really want to be able to sleep together. I don't want to die a virgin." Okay, fine.
I don't know. Okay. That's a good argument. That's a good argument. All right. What I would say is, Paul is saying it's not sinful to do that, but again, I think you're slipping in the other moral question of, in that sense, marriage is not an idol. One of the things that marriage does is that it provides you a sort of scenario in which it's appropriate to engage in intimacy, right? That's a covenant relationship. Since the Bible is intent on covenant relationships, you are entering into a covenant relationship in which God says this is permissible. You and I have a covenant relationship as brothers in the Lord. It's impermissible for us to engage in that kind of act in that particular covenant, because every covenant is different, right?
There's stipulations.
Yeah, the stipulations are different. And I think this is what people miss about the whole gay marriage thing. Like, from a covenantal standpoint, it makes sense why we wouldn't, two men or two women can't engage in a covenant, because that's not the terms of a normal covenant relationship.
So, would it be violating if you knew the person was sterile?
Okay. Okay. I would say no, and obviously I would say no. It's the reason being that adoption is encouraged and used, and so I would say no.
Okay. See, I'm going to land, if I had to put it, I'm going to land on yes. And my reason is because when I do personalize, and I think of how I felt when I was 16, 17, 18 years old, if I knew that the love of my life had 6 more months to live, I think I could take care of her in a more profound way if we were married. Because to your point, yes, you can take care of someone if you're not married. But you can even more profoundly take care of someone and, as it were, cinch up some of those emotional and sexual desires that you have. And I think that's fine.
I mean, if she's terminally ill or he's terminally ill. Like, why are you even like? I would feel really kind of weird.
Have you read the book Fault in Our Stars?
What's the name of the book?
It's a book called Fault in Our Stars, or it's also a movie, and it's basically two people with cancer who are very sick who fall in love.
Okay,
and they have a relationship. I could, I mean, am I going to marry her where she's on an IV in a hospital bed and can't do anything? I mean, if it's that kind of a picture, then no, but I don't know that I would be in the same emotional state. But if they're still functioning fairly well, but in the next, let's say, 2 months, they're going to deteriorate quickly, and in the next 4 months and 5 months and 6 months, they're going to be really bad.
Yeah.
Even if I had just a couple months, I could see doing it.
Okay, just in case my wife is listening.
Honey, I would have married you.
I mean, there's no question in my mind I would have married you. I mean, obviously, there's a waiting period, too. I mean, you just can't get married. I don't know if people realize. Maybe if you go to, like, Las Vegas or something. But we had to wait, like, what was it, a week or something? Like, you had to get the marriage license and then wait a couple.
No, forget that. Just get the passport.
Just get the passport. I mean, okay, knowing what I know about my wife now, I would have married her a lot sooner. I mean, I think she's an amazing person. But there's something in me. This is like faith-seeking understanding here. I'm going to fall on Anselm, Augustine. My faith position, my sort of innate faith position is that it is treating marriage as a sacrament. And listen, okay, so I have Catholic friends, and so I'm not saying this to kind of rail against the Catholic Church. We don't have that kind of podcast. We don't come on here and rail against people.
Just Sam Harris. No.
You know whom I support. I mean,
he's like one of my favorite podcasts.
Yeah, I think he's interesting. I think I love the way he thinks. I just happen to think he's wrong. Yeah. He's provocative. He's wrong on like 95% of everything I listen to. Some things I'm like, yes, okay, I agree with that. Yeah. But getting to the point, as we know, in Catholic circles, marriage is considered a sacrament, right? Mm-hmm. And for me personally, there's something inherently sacramental with saying, okay, I am going to marry you, even though I know you're going to die in 2 months, because it's almost like, I'm going to do this because I don't want you to die single.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
I have to think about it a little more.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a hole somewhere I could.
I'm sure there is.
I feel like my spidey senses are tingling and saying, "Man, there's a hole somewhere there. Just give me a little bit of time to find it."
Your faith is seeking understanding. All right, brother.
Hey, I think that's it. I think that's good. Until next time. Maybe pick up the trolley. We keep putting the trolley problem off.
Let's pick it up.
We'll pick it up.
Yeah, we'll pick it up. All right. Bye.